Thanks everyone for coming. Really excited to have you all here today. A lot of new and familiar faces in the crowd today. The purpose of this conference is not so much for us to focus on 0x protocol and for us to promote it to you and stuff like that, but more so to focus on the larger problem that we are interested in addressing with technologies like 0x protocol, and that is tokenization. And so the purpose of this brief presentation is to just provide background context to everyone and to kind of set the direction for the rest of the talks that we'll have throughout the day. All right, so we'll start out just with terminology. So a token is a scarce digital asset that exists on a public blockchain. And tokenization is the kind of accelerating trend of taking all forms of value and representing them as tokens on public blockchains. And so early on, one of the motivating factors that really led to 0x existing, we saw Ethereum and all of the development that was taking place on top of it, and we envisioned a world in which all forms of value were tokenized on public blockchains. So things like fiat currencies, stocks, bonds, video game items, loyalty points, airline miles, all of these things. There's this trend. We're going to talk a lot about it today, but I think it's important to first discuss why is this important? Like, why bother? Who cares about tokenization? Is it just because it's cool and it's exciting to talk about for tech people, or is it actually going to make a difference in the world? And then also we'll also go through some of the history that led us up to where we are today. So what is the potential impact of tokenization? We believe that tokenization presents us with an opportunity to eliminate the geographic lottery. And what do I mean by that? So the primary determinant in someone's economic and other opportunities in life are largely determined by the place, the location in which they are born. And if you're lucky, you end up in a location where there is a government that gives you a voice, that gives you an education, and that uses its resources in a responsible manner, and that will also not be too corrupt. But most people are not really that lucky. And so tokenization gives us an opportunity to take this geographic lottery and kind of leave it behind. And so public blockchains give us an opportunity to, and how are we going to do that? It's through public blockchains and tokenization. It gives us an opportunity to democratize access to financial services and markets in the same way that the internet has democratized access to information. And so this is something that a lot of the people in the room here have seen and observed firsthand within our own lifetimes, the democratization of information through the internet. And so even in my own life, I remember when I was young, if I wanted to find some information, I was fortunate, I could go to the public library and I could find a book. And then, information went digital, and my family had a personal computer at our house. We didn't have internet, but we had a piece of software called Encarta, and it allowed us to take all of this information that might be in a library and to access it in the comfort of your own home. And then the internet emerged in the last 2 decades. And in that period of time, 95% of the US population has plugged into the internet, 55% of the global population has access to the internet, and the internet provides these amazing tools and sources of information, like Wikipedia, and there are also, peer-to-peer networks for sharing information, like BitTorrent and Napster and things like that as well. And so, thinking back to before the internet existed and to where we are now, you have access to any information you could possibly want. It's in the palm of your hand at any time of day. And so we believe that tokenization and public blockchains can provide this same type of change, but when it comes to financial services and markets. And that is a good thing for everyone. And so, how do we get there? And how has tokenization kind of gotten to where it is today? So we're going to do a quick walkthrough of the history of tokenization. So it all starts with the first really public blockchain, Bitcoin. The 2008 financial crisis was very painful for people around the world, and Bitcoin really emerged very soon after the financial crisis. And Bitcoin represents different things to different people. I'm going to be very careful about what I say Bitcoin is, because I don't want to offend anyone out there on the internet. But some of the things that Bitcoin represents: it's internet currency, it's a store of value, a medium of exchange, but it's also a hedge against poor monetary policy. Maybe you're living in Venezuela and you need a way to protect your assets. And Bitcoin is also, a mechanism for opting out of the existing financial system, which we have seen is not always operating in the best interest of the people. So after Bitcoin emerged, it set off a wave of other blockchains that were being experimented with and created, and this is before Ethereum. And people were experimenting with ways of representing different forms of value on the Bitcoin blockchain. So for example, colored coins are kind of Bitcoin's version of tokens that sit on top of the blockchain. And there was also discussion within the cryptocurrency community about other interesting new ideas like Namecoin and decentralized exchanges and decentralized organizations. And all of this was being experimented with. But there really wasn't a very flexible and ideal solution for tokenization until Ethereum arrived in 2014. And so, in 2014, Vitalik introduces Ethereum at Bitcoin Miami. And one of the main points he emphasizes about Ethereum is that it allows you to tokenize all sorts of different digital assets, and it also allows for smart contracts, which are tools that allow you to manipulate these assets or to enter into different types of agreements with these assets. And so Ethereum set off a avalanche of innovation, and we'll walk through some of the interesting things that have emerged on top of Ethereum. So Ethereum emerges in 2014. The ERC20 token standard is conceived towards the end of 2016, and this is a new system, a new technology. You might imagine that people will be careful and move slowly, but just about a month after the ERC20 token was conceived, what did people do? They built a smart contract called the DAO, and they crowdfunded $50 million worth of Ether. And in exchange for that Ether, people were issued these DAO tokens. And those DAO tokens would entitle you to any profits that were generated by that entity's investments. And within 6 months, the DAO contract was hacked. And this led to many people losing money, and eventually, a lot of disarray within the community, and eventually it led to Ethereum forking into 2 different blockchains. So we didn't start out slow, we started out very quickly. And with following the DAO hack, things accelerated at an even faster pace with the ICO bubble. So between 2016 and 2018, hundreds and hundreds of different assets were sold in crowd sales around the world, and billions of dollars were raised to purchase these assets. And I would say, much was learned through the DAO hack and through the ICO bubble within the industry. But it's interesting to see what people will do when they're given this freedom to innovate and experiment and interact with each other in an open financial market. Next, we saw a variety of different types of digital assets, blockchain native assets. So things like video game items and domain names, things like identicons that allow you to, other people to identify your wallet address, and millions of dollars going into these little ecosystems that were taking form. And so early on, there was Ethereum name service, and Ethereum name service is like it's a way to assign domain names to Ethereum addresses. So in the same way you might look for a tag, like a specific user tag on Twitter or a specific website, google.com, ENS allows you to label your Ethereum address with a domain name. And so there are over 800,000 of these ENS domain names in existence today. People have purchased them, they have traded them. There are these open markets around ENS names. We saw CryptoPunks, which was one of the earliest digital collectibles, and it allowed you to label your address with a visual representation of a face that you find compelling. And then later on, we saw more interesting and kind of broader scale projects emerge around gaming. So CryptoKitties emerged and single-handedly congested the entire Ethereum blockchain for weeks at a time. And there are over 2 million of these CryptoKitty collectibles in existence today. We saw Decentraland introduce a virtual world in which you could buy parcels of real estate, and people can, in the future, people will be able to dive into a virtual reality world that is based on Decentraland. We saw internet communities, such as the subreddit r/ETHTrader, introduce community currency, where people that contribute valuable content to the subreddit are rewarded, and those tokens that are awarded to them can be used for buying a banner image and advertising. And we also saw recently Gods Unchained, a trading card game that raised $6 million by selling packs of cards, and over 2 million cards have been sold to date. So digital collectibles have been a major wave of innovation on top of Ethereum. Digital collectibles have existed on other blockchains, but I would say the level of activity and innovation is very high, and we're going to learn a lot more about this space today with some of our speakers. And then decentralized finance emerges on Ethereum. And I don't know did anyone know how much value is locked in DeFi? Does anyone? $1 billion, that's right. So last night, over $1 billion of value, we reached this milestone of $1 billion of value locked in decentralized finance. But decentralized finance really begins with stable coins, which are representations or alternatives to fiat currency. And DAI is a decentralized stablecoin, was launched in late 2017, and this was one of the kind of pieces of fundamental bedrock needed for decentralized finance to emerge. And then later we saw a centralized stablecoin, so a digital representation of a physical dollar that actually exists somewhere, USDC. We saw this emerge through Circle and Coinbase. And this gave rise to a massive wave of innovation. In 2019, we saw over $2 billion of trading activity in DeFi, and this is through decentralized exchanges. And the ability for anyone in the world to create their own smart contracts that can interact with other pieces of financial infrastructure, so smart contract composability, has given rise to an enormous number of different use cases within DeFi. And so DeFi has over the last 2 years, gone from non-existent to a multi-billion-dollar industry or vertical on top of a public blockchain that anyone can connect to if you have an internet connection. And this is a very unique, very unique thing to see. It's you know, I think that, you know, the progress that's been made over the last 2 years speaks for itself. It's incredible. And we're going to dive a lot deeper into this later today with some of our other speakers. So that was a little bit about, you know, what has been tokenized on top of Ethereum in the last few years. But what will be tokenized in the next 10 years? And what is the potential scale of this tokenization? So I put together a table. It is my gut feeling of where things might end up in 10 years. But we have different types of assets, different categories or asset classes, and then a number of assets associated with that vertical or asset class. And so for protocol tokens, these are things like cryptocurrencies or decentralized networks that have a native asset, things like ICOs. You know, I imagine we'll probably, you know, there are many of these things today. I imagine over time we'll see consolidation to a smaller number of like core protocols and technologies that are used to drive Web3. And then we'll see things like traditional assets begin to move onto public blockchains, things like registered securities, equity, things like fiat, commodities, real estate. And we could see, you know, it really depends on the speed at which regulation evolves, Oric. And, but there could be millions of these assets in 10 years. And then there are internet native communities that create their own forms of value, things like memberships and reputation systems, things like governance tokens and DAOs. And we can see things like personal tokens and ISAs. And so Aragon, I believe we have Jorge in the crowd. So Aragon is a platform for creating these decentralized organizations, and they just recently reached their 1,000th DAO on top of Ethereum. And so personal tokens, these are internet native forms of value that can be used within internet communities. We see things like personal tokens, so if you want to get some design help or some product or legal advice, or if you want some really dank memes, you can buy personal tokens from people on Twitter, and you can create a workforce. So the potential scale of these types of assets is, I would imagine, much higher in 10 years, maybe even hundreds of millions. And then prediction markets, so things like betting on the outcomes of sports events, or politics, or weather, really anything you could possibly imagine. Like, the potential scale is enormous. And so we'll learn more about prediction markets later today with Joey Krug. And then finally, digital collectibles and NFTs, things like video game items. You know, I could see 100 billion of these things existing in 10 years from now. The potential scale is just really enormous. But it'll only happen if, you know, we keep developing and innovating. And so today we have the rare opportunity to speak to many of the people that are pushing all of this forward. And I'm really excited to listen into these discussions, and I hope that everyone enjoys it. So that's kind of what we have. That is kind of the background and context that we have for the rest of the day's presentations. I hope that everyone can come away from this conference today feeling inspired about the potential impact of tokenization. And yeah, we really appreciate everyone coming to this event. And yeah, we are very fortunate to have you here. So thank you very much.